Beth, what are you doing?
I'm trying to create a sonic boom. Airplanes like the SR-71, once they break the sound barrier, there's this great sonic boom. Well, you can break the sound barrier with a bullwhip. When you hear that crack, that's actually a sonic boom. I'm just not very good at it.
Well, can I try?
Sure.
See, that's not too hard.
No, I guess I'm just going to need some practice.
Yeah, a little bit of practice. You'll be good at it. Do you have some time?
I got about 30 minutes.
This is STEM in 30. Now, I'm going to teach you to whip. You've got to teach me to nay-nay. Now, I'm not going to do the stinky leg.
Please don't.
This is STEM in 30.
Hi, I'm Beth.
And I'm Marty.
And we are coming to you live from the Stephen F. Udvar-Hazy Center. Now, to get started today, we'd first like to welcome our in-house audience, which is Farmwell Station Middle School.
These guys have some great questions prepared to ask our experts today, and this is where we need you, our viewers at home, to submit questions as well. Submit them online. We have an expert standing by, ready to answer those questions, and some of them we might even use on the show.
Now, this museum is incredible. Here we can house objects that are too large for the downtown museum. Objects like the Concorde and the Enola Gay and the Space Shuttle Discovery, which actually launched the Hubble Space Telescope into low Earth orbit. But today we'll be talking about the Lockheed Martin SR-71 Blackbird.
This plane is amazing. Made mostly of titanium, it is so cool. This is actually an SR-71 toy that I had when I was a kid, and I used to play with it all the time. To get a chance to be close to this plane is really, really cool. Now, recently, Beth and I had a chance to talk with one of the pilots, Colonel Buzz Carpenter, and listen to some of his memories about flying this exact plane. Let's hear what he had to say.
I'm joined today by Buzz Carpenter, who's a docent here at the Udvar-Hazy Center, but also flew the SR-71. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Beth, it's my pleasure to be here.
Now, would you tell me a little bit, how were you recruited to fly the SR-71?
Beth, it's an interesting story. I graduated from the Air Force Academy in 1967, and one of the Blackbirds flew by for our graduation ceremonies. And I'd seen the airplane earlier when I was doing kind of a cadet internship at Edwards Air Force Base, but I really never expected to fly the airplane. On my way to Vietnam, and I'm flying tactical reconnaissance, RF-4s, I met a Colonel Jerry O'Malley. It turns out he flew the first operational mission in the SR-71 out of Okinawa, Japan, and I would later serve under him. And he kind of told me, he said, "You're the kind of guy I think we're looking for, but you're way too young and you don't have enough flying hours." So I became stationed at Okinawa, Japan, and flew as much as I possibly could. You had to be a volunteer, so you submitted an application to Beale Air Force Base in Northern California, and you included your personnel record, your medical record, and your flight record. And you hoped as they reviewed it, they would find something interesting and that they would call you back for a week-long evaluation. So I was called back. I was delighted. The first 2 days were an astronaut's physical.
Wow.
Then you had a series of interviews, and then as a pilot, I had to fly with 2 or 3 of the current SR-71 pilots in the companion trainer, the T-38, to see how I handled the airplane. I left at the end of the week. The wing commander said, everything looks okay. you know, we'll get back with you. And about 4 months later, I received a telegram in Japan in December of 74 that I would be coming to Beale in July 75 and start training in this airplane.
Yeah, I have a funny question. How did you heat up your lunch in this?
You could heat up your lunch if you want, because it looked like a tube of toothpaste. And you put on, actually I have it in my pocket, a tube like this. You screwed it on, you broke the seal, and then you could hold this whole thing against the window, because my window was about 580 degrees because the way the airplane heated. So that was one way, if you had a meal, that you could heat it actually in the cockpit.
When you think of all the missions you flew, what's one that stands out? Which was one of your favorite ones?
In March of 79, it's almost like the news today. The Saudi Arabians and the Yemenis were fighting along with some of the others, and the satellites were not in the right position. So it was the first time the British or any Europeans allowed us to fly out of Europe into the Middle East and come back there. So this is probably the most memorable mission. And President Carter monitored the mission the whole way.
Okay.
The interesting thing is the French wouldn't let us overfly. So instead of flying out of England and cutting across France into the Mediterranean, I had to fly around Portugal and Spain. So it ended up being 9 hours and 45 minutes and 5 sets of refuelings. And 2 of the sets of tankers came out of Egypt. They looked like regular tankers, so the Egyptians were not aware of exactly what we were doing, collecting the information.
Now, I understand there's an origin story that these things were called Habu.
That's correct. They were first flown, the A-12, which was a single-seat CIA predecessor. They built beautiful facilities at Kadena Air Base on the island of Okinawa in Japan. When the Japanese saw this airplane, when it takes off, it's black. It takes off rather steeply. It looks like almost like a cobra. They have a native snake on the island that's very poisonous that's called a habu. So the Japanese started calling this airplane the Habu. The name stuck because the Air Force never came up with a different name to it, other than calling it the Blackbird.
We call it the Blackbird, right?
Exactly.
Thank you so much for joining us today.
I am delighted to be here.
We're now joined by Dr. Lane Karafantis, a curator here at the National Air and Space Museum. Thanks so much for talking with us today.
Glad to be here.
Now, the SR-71 wasn't necessarily the first spy plane. There were a few predecessors to it, right?
That's true. In the post-war years, the CIA wanted to find a way to take pictures over the Soviet Union to see what sort of air defense systems they had, what sort of planes they were building. And so one of the designers at Lockheed created the U-2, which was a very high-flying reconnaissance aircraft. Now, unfortunately, the U-2 flew very slowly, so there was a high probability it would get shot down, and one eventually did. So before the U-2's tour was even fully over, the division at Lockheed was already trying to come up with a design for a plane that would both be high-flying and very, very fast.
And this one definitely fits that bill as very, very fast. Now, Kelly Johnson was instrumental in getting this off the ground. Can you tell us about him?
Yeah, Kelly Johnson was one of the lead designers at Skunk Works, which was a division of Lockheed, and he was responsible for designing the P-80, the U-2, the SR-71, and a number of other very, very famous planes.
Now, you mentioned Skunk Works, and there's a skunk on the tail here. Can you tell us that story?
Right. During World War II, there was a need for a very secret jet to be developed, and Lockheed was asked, hey, could you put together some designs for us, but it has to be done under the utmost secrecy. So there was a division, part of Lockheed, that was dedicated to creating these craft, and the engineers that worked there were told, you can't tell anybody about this, it's a very, very secret project you're working on. And at the time, there was a comic strip called Little Abner, and within this comic strip, a very mysterious part of the forest where secret things are created was called Skunk Works. So the story goes that one day an engineer answered the phone, hey, Skunk Works, and the nickname just stuck.
Awesome. Well, you ready to take some questions?
Sure.
All right, let's start with a video question.
My name is Noah, and my question is, how many SR-71 Blackbirds failed in the making, and what was the hardest piece of technology to make or obtain?
Yeah, great. I wouldn't say that any of the Blackbirds were failures. There were a few that were lost in test flights, but there were 32 Blackbirds made, and they were all fired at thousands and thousands of times, and not one was lost to enemy fire over the years. As far as the really difficult technologies that we're able to make or obtain, almost every component of this aircraft was innovated. And so you can talk about the titanium that was used, the cameras, almost every aspect of this craft was difficult and innovative.
Wow. All right, how about an online question? How long does it take the SR-71 to accelerate to top speed, Mach 3?
That's a great question. Actually, the Blackbird will accelerate to about 200 miles per hour before it takes off of the runway. And then after 7 minutes or so, it needs to be immediately refueled because the fuel have been leaking out of it so far. It gets up to about 35,000 feet and it is refueled. And then after 20 minutes or so, it will accelerate from 350 miles per hour to more than Mach 3.
Wow, that's incredible. All right, we've got an audience question next.
Are there plans to make a new and improved Blackbird? If so, what would they change?
Any plans for a new and improved Blackbird?
Oh, that's a really good question. Actually, Lockheed is trying to propose a follow-up to the SR-71, which would be called the SR-72. Even though it would be a really altogether different craft, it would be just as large as the SR-71, but it would be unmanned, and it would also go even faster than this plane already goes. It would be going hypersonic, which is faster than Mach 6.
Wow, that's unbelievable. Now, if you can actually find SR-71s and A-12s around the country at different museums, we encourage you to look around and find a museum that has one because this plane is super cool. Now, recently I had a chance to talk with one of the pilots, Buzz Carpenter, and we walked around the plane, and we started out by looking at the cameras and the nose of this plane. Check this out. Well, now we're going to get a chance to actually walk around the plane with Buzz Carpenter, who actually flew it. Now, this nose cone comes off, doesn't it?
It's actually three noses. There's a training nose that looks like the nose you see there. The radar nose has a similar external view, and if the optical camera was in, we called it the country's camera because it took a picture 72 miles wide, there was a big glass window that came along the hole from either side of the nose that the camera fit into.
Now, 4 bolts held this on?
Only 4 bolts held the nose on because the air pressure as you're flying along is keeping the nose very firmly in place, and the 4 bolts is all they required, which made it easier on the ground for them to swap out noses if the mission was changed.
Now tell me about the camera that would be on board here. There was a little bit of film in there, right?
The camera in the nose, which took that picture 72 miles wide, the film itself was 5 inches wide, 2 miles long. So when you landed and the photo maintenance people took it down, they had quite a job because they had to take the nose and the film back to the photo lab, cut it into 500-foot lengths, put on cotton surgical gloves, go the whole length of the film to make sure there's no cuts or tears, and then put it in for processing.
So it wasn't a very fast process to get the pictures back to somebody on the ground to actually look at.
That's correct, and that's part of the reason this airplane was retired, because it took a while, hours, sometimes measured in days, to get the information that had been requested to the people who had requested it.
And now I'm joined by James David. He is one of the curators here at the National Air and Space Museum. Jim, thank you so much for being here with us today.
Glad to be here.
Do you want to tell us a little bit about what this plane did?
What the SR-71 did, as with the U-2 and A-12 that Lane mentioned, and some planes that flew at lower altitudes, they collected information. And in the case of the SR-71, that was mostly photographs. Very, very important for our military to photograph areas of the world, and not just do it once, but to do it repeatedly.
Now, okay, go ahead.
For example, airfields. Where are in enemy's airfields? What planes are on them? What sort of defensive weapons do they have around them? So those are the kind of things that the SR-71 and these other aircraft photographed.
Now, Buzz mentioned that there was a radar and a camera. Why would you need a camera on a plane that, or why would you need a radar on a plane that was taking photos?
Well, the nose of the SR-71 carried either a camera or a radar imager. And there was a separate camera that flew on all SR-71s further back on the fuselage. But the advantage of radar over an ordinary camera is that a radar can capture an image at night or in bad weather. The cameras can operate at night or in bad weather, but all they're taking pictures of are cloud cover or the blackness of the earth with the electric lights of a few towns. And that's not the kind of information that the people who run the program want to get.
Now, these were not digital images, so
Correct.
This is a piece of film, so we would put this film in and it would have to come back and be processed. And once it's processed, then what happens?
Well, just let me say, Beth, that this is 70mm film, which the cameras towards the rear of the plane used. When they flew a camera in the nose of the plane, they flew film of 5 inches width. But once the film came back and was developed, and a lot of people don't understand film today because very, very few people use it. Everybody has digital cameras. But it has to be developed, and then as Buzz said, it was cut into sections, and then highly trained men and women looked at it on various pieces of equipment, including light tables. And they went through these long rolls of film looking for airfields and naval bases and missile complexes and new roads in the jungle and all sorts of things like that.
So this wasn't an easy job.
It was not by any means, and it was complicated because some countries tried to camouflage their activities.
Okay.
And so the analysts had to determine when that was going on. Well, this looks like just an ordinary forest, but we have a couple roads going into it, and maybe there's some hidden activity there.
Okay, Jim, do you want to take some questions?
Certainly.
Okay, let's start with the video question.
My name is Felix, and my question is, how is the stealth technology in the SR-71 used in today's aircraft?
Well, the SR-71 was not a stealth aircraft. It incorporated some early stealth features to cut down on the radar cross-section and make it less detectable by countries we were flying over. But today we have completely stealth aircraft, the F-117 fighter and 2 bombers. But the SR-71 was a stepping stone in the development of that technology for those completely stealth aircraft.
Let's take an online question. What was a normal mission like?
All missions, SR-71 or any other aircraft that collected intelligence for that matter, was highly planned. And they did not want to fly around surface-to-air missile sites and things like that. But at the same time, the aircraft and the crew was tasked with photographing certain targets on Earth. So they were highly planned, and of course, in part, they were dependent on weather.
All right,
And
go ahead.
And so if everything was a go, weather-wise and so on and so forth, the mission would take place. And as Buzz said, some of the missions were 9, 10, 11 hours long.
Wow. We have an audience question. What's your question?
Was the SR-71 kept a secret from other countries? And if so, how was it done?
The SR-71 was not kept a secret from other countries. The world knew about it actually beginning in 1964. They knew about the plane, but the individual missions or flights were highly secret because you didn't want to tell the countries you were flying over that we'd be flying over at 10 o'clock local time tomorrow morning, and then they could get their defenses ready. Now, some countries knew they were being overflown because they had radars on the ground and things like that, but you never give advance warning of that. But the world knew about the existence of the airplane.
Thank you.
Sure.
Now, Jim, you went over how much work it was to look at these photographs. And we've got a couple, and Marty is with some students, and they are actually taking a look at some photos. So Marty, do you want to tell us what's going on?
Terrific. Sure, Beth. So we've got a couple of images here, and you guys go ahead and start looking at these. These are images similar to what might have been brought back by an SR-71, and these guys are no longer students, they are analysts. They are looking at these images, seeing what they find. So, Caitlin, what do you see on this image?
I think that this is an airfield.
Okay. You got an airfield. What did you notice over here?
Rivers, mountains, maybe some land over there.
Okay, great. So you guys found some really interesting geographic features, but then Kaylin jumped right in and found an airfield. And that's exactly what we're looking for. We're looking for targets of military importance to see what other countries are doing with either airfields or even ports to look for submarines, all kinds of different things. You guys did a really nice job being analysts on this. Now, I want you to help me with this. Okay, so what we've got here is a metal sphere and a metal ring. Now, do those two fit together? Yeah, so the sphere goes right through the ring, and we're gonna start heating this sphere up to see what happens to it. So let's go ahead and turn this on, go ahead and hold that right over there. All right, so we're getting all warmed up here. Beth, what's going on over with you?
Well, I'm now joined by titanium expert Stan Siegel. Thank you so much for being here today.
It's my pleasure, Beth.
Stan, why was titanium a good choice as the metal for the SR-71?
Well, we've seen that the mission is very difficult. The metal that we choose has to be very light to get to these heights. It has to be very strong at these speeds, and also there's a lot of heating occurring, so it has to have good strength at high temperatures. So in looking at it, there were three choices, and I have these choices here. I have aluminum, titanium, and steel. Now there are two common things about what I have in front of me here. First of all, the diameters are all the same, right? The other thing that's the same, they all weigh the same. So look at that. If you're going to build an aircraft, this is aluminum. Wouldn't this be the logical material to use? However, this plane, the skin is over 500 Fahrenheit, and aluminum is not really good over 250. It gets too soft. So that limits the use of this to lower speeds like Mach 2, and that was the Concorde, which is also in this museum. So it was built out of aluminum. So the choices that we now have are two, steel and titanium, and the titanium is almost half the weight. So what are you going to build it of? These are two strong metals, and they're good at high temperatures. So it became titanium. This plane is 93% by weight titanium.
Now, titanium is used for other things commercially, and you have something funny here. Do you want to tell us a little bit about this?
Yes, that maybe somebody might guess what that shape is for. And it is a straw, a titanium straw. Beyonce insisted that they have titanium straws on one of her world tours. Now that's not a big market for titanium because you know what other materials can be used as a straw.
Plastic.
And this is very expensive straw, by the way. But there are other applications. When titanium was first industrialized in the 50s, it was all military. And gradually, and it was military aerospace, and gradually it got into commercial aerospace. And today, about 50% of all the titanium is used in aerospace applications. Now that leaves another 50% for other new applications, and that includes the chemical industry and heat exchangers and vessels for production of many different types of chemicals like chlorine. But there's also some consumer applications which are sort of interesting, which include this, but that's very minor. But titanium, maybe you've heard of golf club heads of titanium, and it's used as exhausts on motorcycles. And probably more important is what's used in the body, because titanium has excellent corrosion resistance and it likes the body. And as a result, knee replacements, hip replacements, and also structures replacing bones in the body are now usually titanium.
So there are better applications than drinking straws.
That's right.
Okay. Well, Buzz and Marty, as they were walking around, noticed something interesting on the SR-71 skin. Let's see what they found out.
Well, we've moved a lot closer to the plane, and as you get closer, you can see there are some pretty significant gaps here. Can you tell us about those?
Because of the heating on the airplane, an average temperature over 600 degrees, overhead here, this is the most significant gap. The airplane grows 3 to 4 inches in length, and this particular gap here can expand anywhere from 1 to 2 inches to account for the heating that the titanium metal goes through as the airplane goes into cruise. There's a couple other expansion joints on the airplane, but this is the most significant one. And the airplane grows 1 to 2 inches in width also because of the heating. Inside the engine, because heated the core of the engine to 2,000 degrees and the afterburner to 3,200 degrees, the engine actually grows 6 inches in length and a couple inches in width to accommodate this tremendous heating that it sustains for an hour and a half at a time.
How hot would the outside of the plane get?
The outside of the airplane, the coolest part was about 450 degrees. The hottest part of the exterior of the airplane was over 1,200 degrees.
All right, well, Caitlin's been heating this up. Caitlin, now see if that'll fit back through. It won't fit back through. That's the thing called thermal expansion. Stan, can you tell us what's going on there?
Yes, I'd like to. All metals will expand if we heat it from room temperature, and as we go to higher and higher temperatures, it expands more. And there's a coefficient of thermal expansion where we can, for each metal, and it's slightly different, and we can calculate exactly what the change that occurs if we know the temperature that's there.
Great. Now, Caitlin, dunk that in the water and see what happens. All right, now see if it'll fit through the ring now. Fits back through. That metal's cooled back down and it's gone back to its original shape. Really nice job. Well, Stan, you ready to take a couple questions?
We'll try.
All right, let's start with an online question. Titanium.
Well, basically, as I indicated earlier, it's 93% of the airframe. And so that's most of the airplane. Also, what's sort of interesting, we have talked about the engine made by Pratt & Whitney. About 7% of that engine is titanium. Current engines are closer to 30% titanium.
Wow. All right. Well, let's head back over to Beth and Jim and Lane.
Now, that's all the time we have for today. I want to thank you all for being here. I also want to thank the International Titanium Association. And if you're looking forward to our next STEM in 30, you should check this out. I'm Beth Wilson. I'm one of the hosts of STEM in 30. Did you know that the National Air and Space Museum actually has an artifact on Mars?
There's no museum on Mars?
Actually, the museum and the Red Planet have a really long history together. It was a signal sent from Mars that triggered the ribbon cutting that opened the museum in 1976. Later, NASA transferred ownership of the Viking lander to us, so we actually have an artifact on Mars. This one here in the museum is a Viking lander test article. If you want to learn more about what's roving around on the Red Planet, be sure to check out the next STEM in 30.
Yeah.
Now, if you enjoyed our interview with Buzz Carpenter, there's a longer one that you can find on our website. Be sure to check that out, and we hope to see you soon.